My name is Aaliyah Schaefer, and in this presentation, I'm going to be talking about Raymond Carver's Cathedral and how blindness is a motive and how it serves multiple functions. Raymond Carver is a realist writer, and he uses dirty realism, which depicts mundane aspects of an ordinary life in a plain way. The main reason I chose to research this short story was because of the major character development I saw by the end of it, and I really just felt myself engaged in the story the whole way through. Some themes I saw in the story were jealousy, insecurity, and connection. Throughout my research, critics mainly believe that in the moment of epiphany at the end of the story, there is a parallel between the reader's experience and the narrator drawing the cathedral. We as readers are left to fill many gaps throughout the whole story. My thesis claim is that Raymond Carver uses blindness as a dominant motive of judgment. The narrator's blindness is not the same of the blind man, but social and emotional. In the beginning of this story, the narrator says, "I was not enthusiastic about his visit. He was no one I knew, and his being bothered me. A blind man in my house was not something I looked forward to." That being said, right off the bat, we can see the narrator being ignorant towards Robert, the blind man. Kirk Nessett explains this in the way of jealousy by saying that the narrator's buried hostility is rooted in the blind man's association with his wife's past and her independent nature in general. We see the narrator being jealous when he talks about their relationship and how and why his wife would want a relationship with somebody like that. Another example of when we see him being jealous or having animosity towards the blind man is when he's talking about Robert's wife, and he mentions the word inseparable, and that seems to stick out to him. I believe that this is a word that sticks out to him because he wouldn't think about using that between him and his wife and describing their relationship. I believe the more in depth you go into the story, you see how insecure the narrator is. And this is not just within himself, but his relationship as well. He says, "I saw my wife laughing as she parked the car. I saw her get out of the car and shut the door. She was still wearing a smile, just amazing." This is becoming an example of his own personal blindness as well. He is completely unaware of his wife's lack of happiness until he sees him or her with the blind man. The drawing of the cathedral is a perfect metaphor for the entirety of the whole story. Throughout, we see parallels between the dinner menu and the flying buttresses of the cathedral and so on. The blind man was brought there by the narrator's wife, and by the end of the story, there is a moment of human understanding. The narrator makes connection, and you see an example of a major character development by the end of the story. There is a moment when Robert and the blind man are alone, and the blind man sees an opportunity. He asks for a pen and a piece of paper and starts to draw. The blind man said, "We are drawing a cathedral. Me and him are working on it together." His fingers rode my fingers as my hand went over the paper. It was like nothing else in my life up to now. I think this is remarkable and shows to never judge anyone based on your own personal feelings. The blind man gave the husband an experience he has never had before. Diane Henningfeld, an associate professor at Adrian College, says, "Even when Robert proclaims the cathedral completed, the narrator keeps his eyes closed. It is as if in the darkness created by his closed eyelids that he finally sees the essence of the cathedral, and by extension, the essence of human life. In a moment of quiet epiphany, the narrator makes a shift towards active participation in life, made possible by the slightest communication he shared with Robert." This was the moment the narrator overcame his own personal blindness and accepted the blind man for who he was. Robert Clark at the University of Georgia explains this in the way of how Carver wrote the story and wants people to perceive it. He says, "Most impressionistic stories are narrated from third-person perspective. The author and narrator tend to be self-effacing, and the works lack teaching."